We end our sermon series today with the question, why give? And I have been so excited to preach this sermon because I believe that the story we're about to read is our story as a church. It comes from the book of Exodus, which is the stories of the Israelites as they escape slavery and head towards the promised land. As we meet them today, they are still on their way to the promised land, but that doesn't stop them from building a sanctuary. So listen now to what the Spirit is saying to her church this day. Bezalel and Aholiab and every skillful one to whom the Lord has given skill and understanding to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded. Moses then called Bezalel and Aholiab and every skillful one to whom the Lord had given skill, everyone whose heart was stirred to come do the work. And they received from Moses all the free will offerings that the Israelites had brought for doing work on the sanctuary. They still kept bringing him free will offerings every morning, so that all the artisans who were doing every sort of task on the sanctuary came, each from the task being performed, and said to Moses, "The people are bringing much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do." So Moses gave command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp, "No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary." So the people were restrained from bringing, for what they had already brought was more than enough to do all the work. All those with skill among the workers made the tabernacle with 10 curtains. They were made of fine, twisted linen and blue, purple, and crimson yarns with cherubim skillfully worked into them. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't have a memory of going to church with my parents and watching the plate pass by without my parents putting something in. In fact, I don't have a memory of going to church as a child with my grandparents and watching the plate pass them by either without an offering going in. My brothers and I would be so excited when we were children trying to figure out who was going to get to put in the envelope this week. And as I've thought about this sermon, I have been racking my brain trying to remember if there is any time that I have been with my parents or grandparents in church where I watched them decline putting something in the offering plate or withhold an offering. I'm not saying that there wasn't a time like that, but if there was, I don't remember it. I have no recollection. And I am so grateful that I have my parents and my grandparents as examples of generosity. As I've thought about this, though, it's not just my parents and my grandparents who have taught me what it means to be generous. I've witnessed the generosity of so many people throughout my life, people who have given even though they aren't sure what the outcome of their investment will be. I watched the good people of Davidson College Presbyterian Church make sacrificial offerings year after year after year. I'm standing right here because people made investments. The only reason I went to seminary was because I was approached by someone who thought I had the gifts for ministry and wanted to fund my trial year so I could go do nothing more than test it out for a year. Can you imagine a faith like that? I'm standing here as your pastor because of that trial year, because of that investment in an unknown future. And quite literally, I'm standing right here in this sanctuary because of your investment. You've invested in this building multiple times. It was an act of faith to build this sanctuary, just as it was an act of faith to build the new building. I'm standing here today because of the investment of your pastor nominating committee, the committee that you called and commissioned to discern with every fiber of their being who God was calling to be the next pastor of this congregation. I'm here because of their investment of all of their hopes and dreams for this community. I've seen people give forever. And Owen has too. As I reflected on this, we never had a moment at the beginning of our marriage where we had to negotiate whether we would give to the church or what we would give to the church, because we both had endless examples of generous giving from our parents and our grandparents. But just because something is modeled for you, and just because you repeat the behavior that's been modeled for you, doesn't mean that you actually know why you are doing it. We're approaching Thanksgiving, so why do we eat turkey on Thanksgiving? Because it's what we ate growing up? If I was planning a dinner party, turkey probably wouldn't even be in the top 25 menu items that I would dream up. But we eat turkey because that is what has been modeled for us, and I'm willing to bet that most of us will have a turkey on this year's Thanksgiving dinner table. Giving feels kind of the same way for me to that turkey. Owen and I give because it's what we know, it's what's been modeled for us. So you can imagine my surprise as I thought about preaching this sermon, and I couldn't immediately answer why. That was a big learning moment for me, that I had to stop and think about it more intentionally. It's a commitment I can so easily name. But I think it's so important for us to ask the question of why. But as we've learned over the last weeks, why is the harder question. It's the more personal and the more vulnerable question. And asking a vulnerable question about an already vulnerable topic, what is more vulnerable than our money? Well, it makes sense that we might shy away from that conversation altogether. But what I know to be true of this community is that you are ready to engage hard questions. You are ready to think intentionally about money and ministry and our future together. And so as I thought about stewardship, the text I read this morning just continued to speak deeply to me. The Israelites were a people in exile. And exile can mean a lot of things. It can mean a physical exile where you are removed from your land. Exile can be emotional. You can be cut off from those around you, or you can become numb or uninvested in your surrounding community. Exile can be spiritual. When you thought you knew how things worked, you thought you knew who God was, and then something happens and it makes you question everything, that can send you into a spiritual exile. For the Israelites, exile meant all of those things. They were slaves. They'd been taught that their identity and their worth was tied up in what they could produce and what they could build. And then Moses comes along. Moses, who is a murderer with a stutter, so an unlikely candidate for leadership, he comes along to lead them out of slavery to the promised land, and that sounds pretty good. So they follow him, except Moses doesn't tell them how long it's going to take to get to the promised land. And so they get impatient, which I respect. And as we meet them today, they are still en route to the promised land. They are hopeful about their future, but they aren't there yet. Now, I think it's safe to assume that former slaves, now residing in exile, don't have many belongings, but they do have hearts that long for stability and a sense of security. They certainly don't have money. They literally have the clothes on their backs and the food that they can scavenge. This is not a group of people who would be on any fundraiser's radar, because by all accounts they are running on empty. But Moses tells them that God has called them to build a sanctuary, and to do that, Moses says, I'm going to need all of you to give something. Actually, I'm going to need all of you to give more than you've ever given before. I'm not sure what Moses expected when he told them that, Maybe he thought someone would come forward and mention that he'd been an architect before he'd been enslaved, and so he could help design the sanctuary. And maybe somebody else would come forward and say, I actually know how to bake bricks, and so she would lead the effort to create supplies. And maybe yet another person would come forward and say, I know how to weave, and so I can make all of the paraments for the sanctuary. When I think about what this group of people could possibly offer in response to Moses' stewardship sermon, I think it's more likely that they would have offered skill sets than possessions or things of value. That doesn't keep Moses from challenging them to invest in their future. And after Moses challenges them, the most amazing thing happens. The Israelites came morning after morning with free will offerings. They came offering their possessions. Women taking the pearl and diamond studs out of their earrings, the earrings that had been handed down from their grandmothers and great-grandmothers. Men bringing clothing items that could be used for threads for those weavings of the paraments. The people who had nothing kept showing up with stuff. So much stuff that Moses had to say, enough, enough. We have all that we need to do what God is calling us to do. Can you imagine if I stood right here next Sunday and said, enough? We have all that we need to do what God is calling us to do. You have been so generous, we don't need anything else. That's my dream for stewardship. I don't think it's that far-fetched either, because this community has lived that dream before. You are a community that knows what it's like to show up for and reach a goal. This new building is a testament to that. You invested in the future, and you kept showing up with offerings until your dream could become a reality. You've lived this story before, and we have the opportunity to live it again this stewardship season. The Israelites invested in a future that wasn't certain, but was full of hope. And so have you. I'm going to say it again. You know this story because you have lived this story. The new building would not exist if it weren't for your willingness to invest in the future. Not because that future has been promised to you, but because you have hope for the ministry God will do through you. You have hope for the ways you will grow, ways that we can't even fathom yet. This is your story. Generosity is in your DNA. It is the soil beneath our feet. You know what it means to give toward a future. Giving is the lens by which we see what we really value in this world. Where our treasure is, there our hearts will be also. I think Jesus was right about that. So when we make financial commitments to the church, what we are saying is that we want God to be our first priority. We are proclaiming that our faith comes first and everything else comes second. That's why I give. My faith is the starting point for all that I do. And for all that I hope and all that I grieve, everything flows from that faith. And if I really believe that faith is the first priority, then I can show that with my checkbook. So when I make church my top giving priority, I've found that faith more easily becomes my first priority in every other part of my life. Because giving to the church reorients my life in a way that nothing else can. Several weeks ago, I told you that when I worship, it's practice for me to remember that it's about God, it's not about me. And what I found is that if I don't follow that belief up with a financial commitment, then it becomes easier and easier for me to forget that it's not about me. as soon as I leave the sanctuary on Sunday mornings. The Israelites inspire me to that type of sacrificial giving. They were so committed to prioritizing God that they parted with everything the world had taught them was valuable. They knew that their relationship with God was more valuable than anything else. And so they were able to give and to give and to give until Moses had to shout, "Stop! Stop!" Can you imagine a generosity like that? What would it look like for you to give to a point of needing to be told, "Stop"? We are a generous people at Northridge. Like I said, generosity is in the DNA. And it would be easy for us to rest on all we've done in our past, because I believe that the past of this community is worth celebrating. But I also believe that our future is greater than our past. God has been preparing us for such a time as this, and I believe that God is calling us to engage in more ministry and deeper ministry than we've ever had before. In the face of all that is swirling around us as a community, as a society, as a city, I think this community has a witness that is desperately needed in our world. And we are called to be the church, to walk alongside those who are grieving, to shape the faith of the oldest and the youngest in our midst, to lift our voices in song, and to gather together to hear the word read and proclaimed, to listen to the voices of those who have been long silenced, and to work together toward justice and freedom and peace. Can you imagine what God will do through us if we each make Northridge our top giving priority this year? How many lives could we touch? How could we more fully serve our neighborhood and our city? I do believe that ministry is more than money, but I also believe that God transforms our money into ministry. I am so excited about our future together. You can ask my husband so many times, unprompted, I just belt out about how excited I am for our future together and for all that awaits us. And so as Owen and I fill out our pledge card, we will make Northridge our top giving priority because we are hopeful about the future of this community. We are so confident that God is going to do things that we can't yet imagine. And as we fill out our pledge card, we will remind ourselves once again that our relationship with God is worth more than any possession we could have or hope to have. We will use our pledge as a very tangible way to remind ourselves what we practice in worship. It's not about us. It's about God. And so I ask that you join us in that commitment. I hope that you will think deeply about it. I hope you will pray about it. And I hope you will ask what it means to make Northridge your top giving priority this year, because it is already in your DNA. You know what it means to be generous. And you just need to ask yourself what that generosity looks like this year. And I can't wait for 1 year from now when we are all gathered together and we can have a conversation and say, look at what God did through us because of our commitment to this place. May it be so. Amen.